Everyone thought she was trying to hurt them, even Charles. But as Teresa clung to the edge of Belmont Mansion with 2 screaming toddlers in her arms, only she knew the truth. If she let go, both would die. Everyone thought she was trying to hurt them, even Charles. But as Teresa clung to the edge of Belmont Mansion with 2 screaming toddlers in her arms, only she knew the truth. If she let go, both would die. It had started like any ordinary Sunday morning at Belmont Mansion, if you could call anything about a billionaire's life ordinary. White linen tablecloths rustled in the breeze on the rooftop terrace. A private brunch, complete with a view of the Philadelphia skyline, was laid out with precision. Red wine decanted, strawberries sliced just right, everything in order. Everything controlled. Charles Arnold stood by the table in a crisp blue suit, his phone glued to his ear, giving half-hearted nods to his assistant on the other line. Deals, always deals. The twins were somewhere nearby, likely chasing each other between the golden chairs in their superhero costumes. A last-minute indulgence he allowed because their nanny had called out. That's when he noticed the silence, then the scream, and then the sound that would echo in his bones forever. "Hold me thigh!" He turned, and everything shattered. There, on the ledge, was Teresa, his maid, her gloved hands clutching both his sons, her body halfway off the edge, balancing with 1 foot and every ounce of her willpower. Brian dangled from one arm. Alan, the more adventurous one, had clearly gone over first. Teresa had caught him and somehow grabbed the second. Charles froze. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. "What's this?" he yelled, stumbling forward, knocking over a wineglass in the process, but Teresa didn't even flinch at his voice. Her eyes were locked on the boys, her breath shallow, her arms trembling, and in that moment, something shifted. Not in her, in him. She wasn't letting them fall, she was keeping them alive. Just hours before, he hadn't even remembered her name. She was just the help. Quiet, efficient, invisible. He never asked where she came from, never cared why she never spoke unless spoken to. But now, here she was, dangling on the side of a building for children that weren't even hers. What kind of person does that? Across the mansion, earlier that morning, Teresa Martin had kept her head down as always. Her blue uniform was freshly ironed, apron crisp. She had been working here for nearly a year, not a word out of place, not a task left undone. But today, something felt different. She had seen the twins sneak upstairs in their costumes. She followed, not out of obligation, but instinct. She had seen that look before, and the one on Alan's face, the look that said, "I want to fly." And she knew. Kids like him always try. If you're watching this right now, and your heart's already racing just thinking about what might happen next, let me ask you this. Would you have noticed? Would you have cared enough to follow them upstairs like she did? Because most people wouldn't, and that's exactly why. You need to subscribe, not just for the story, but for the reminder. The people we overlook might be the ones who save us when it matters most. Charles surged toward them. His chest tightened with every step as his polished shoes pounded across the terrace. The air was still, except for the distant sounds of traffic and the piercing screams of his boys. Brian's little superhero cape fluttered in the breeze like a taunt from fate. "Teresa, what are you doing?" Charles roared. For a split second she looked up. Her eyes, wide, panicked, tear-glazed, met his, and in them he didn't see rage or guilt, but fear. Not for herself, for the boys. "Don't move!" she cried. Her voice cracked with the weight of everything. The wind, the pain in her arms, the decisions she'd made in a split second. Charles froze. Alan, still dangling from Teresa's left hand, sobbed violently. Brian's grip on her apron was slipping. He was screaming her name over and over again. "Ressie, don't let me go! Don't let me go!" And in that moment, something terrifying happened. Her right foot, the only thing anchoring her to the terrace floor, began to slide. Charles lunged. "No!" He was too late. Teresa's foot slipped. Her body tilted. All 3 figures toppled forward, and time stopped. But somehow, miraculously, Teresa twisted midair. She held them close to her chest as they fell, not away from the mansion, but into the narrow scaffolding just beneath the edge. A sickening thud echoed off the stone. Metal bars clanged, a potted plant shattered somewhere below, and then silence. Charles's heart collapsed. He dropped to his knees, gripped the ledge and screamed, "Brian! Alan!" He leaned over the edge, and that's when he saw her. Teresa, wedged between steel and stone, cradling both boys like a shield, her head bleeding, eyes fluttering, but breathing. Brian whimpered. Alan clutched her hand. They were alive. Security came rushing within seconds, followed by Charles's personal medic. The children were lifted up first, crying, bruised, but safe. And Teresa, she didn't speak. She didn't move. As they carefully lifted her from the scaffolding, she winced, not in pain, but in restraint, like someone used to holding it all in. Charles stood frozen, watching the scene unfold, watching the woman he had barely acknowledged, the woman he had just accused, risk her life to save his family. And something inside him shattered. Downstairs, EMTs flooded the grand hall. The twins were checked first. Teresa, unconscious, was placed on a stretcher. "Possible concussion," one of them murmured. Charles stepped forward, hesitated, then softly, "Is she going to be okay?" They didn't answer right away. The crowd outside the gates had already started to gather. Neighbors, paparazzi. Social media was ablaze. A billionaire, a black maid, a rooftop, twin sons. And nobody knew the full story yet, but everyone had opinions. The housekeeper, Ruthie, cornered Charles in the foyer. "She saved them," she said firmly, eyes brimming with tears. She didn't hesitate. Charles nodded, but it wasn't enough, not nearly enough. He had judged her. He had shouted at her. In that one split second, he saw a black woman holding white children near a ledge, and he assumed the worst. He had seen what he wanted to see, and now as she was wheeled out of his mansion, her uniform stained with blood and dust, he realized he had almost let her fall. If you're still watching, take a breath. Because this isn't just a story, it's a mirror. How fast do we jump to conclusions? How many people do we misjudge just because of what they look like, where they work, or what we think we saw? Let this sink in before you scroll. And if this story has already moved you even a little, you need to subscribe. Because the next act, what comes after the fall, will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about Teresa Martin. The mansion was quieter than it had ever been. No laughter, no twin voices bouncing down the staircase, no footsteps, no soft humming from the kitchen, just stillness. Charles sat alone in his home office, the blinds pulled halfway shut, his suit jacket still draped over the chair from the day before. The footage had already gone viral. Someone from across the street had caught the fall on camera. His PR team had begged him to release a statement, but he didn't care about damage control. He cared about her, Teresa Martin, the woman who had become a viral headline overnight. Black Maid saves billionaire twins in rooftop miracle. He hated it, because none of them knew the truth. And neither did he. She had been in the hospital overnight, a mild concussion, bruised ribs, and a gash above her eyebrow that required 5 stitches. The twins had made it out with scrapes and trauma, but nothing life-threatening. He had sent flowers. He had offered to cover everything. Private nurses, recovery time, a bonus, a raise. She sent all of it back. At precisely 9 a.m. on Monday morning, she returned, wearing the same uniform, hair tied neatly, shoes shined, her expression calm, unreadable. "Teresa," Charles began, stepping into the grand foyer as she unzipped her coat. "You don't have to be here." "I signed a contract," she said simply, eyes never meeting his. "No, I mean, you could take more time, recover, be with family." "My family's in Baltimore," she replied, "and they already know I'm fine." Charles studied her. Her posture was perfect, controlled, polished, but her eyes, those eyes he remembered from the rooftop, were different, distant, guarded. "I want to talk," he said. "There's nothing to talk about," she replied, walking toward the kitchen. He followed. "Teresa, you saved my children. I did what anyone would do. No, he said, firm now. Most people wouldn't. I wouldn't have even noticed they were missing. Finally she turned. You're right, she said quietly. You wouldn't have. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was honest. Cold, but honest. Charles swallowed. Why didn't you say anything when I shouted at you? Teresa raised an eyebrow. Because in that moment, Mr. Arnold, you didn't want answers. You wanted someone to blame. He couldn't argue with that. The memory of his voice, shouting across the terrace, accusing her, burned like acid in his throat. That night, after she'd gone home, he found himself wandering into the twins' playroom. It was a mess. Capes, plastic swords, building blocks, and one tiny shoe that hadn't made it back from the rooftop. He sat on the floor, picked it up, and remembered something Alan had said while being examined by the medic. She flew with us, Daddy, like Wonder Woman. His throat tightened. Teresa's story was missing from all the headlines. No interviews, no quotes, no background, nothing. She didn't want the spotlight. She didn't want to be thanked. She just wanted to return to being invisible. But he couldn't let that happen, not anymore. And maybe you wouldn't either. If you were in Charles's position, what would you do next? Would you back off, respect her silence, or push harder? And finally listen. Drop your answer in the comments, because this is the point where Charles has to decide, follow his pride or follow his heart. It was raining the next morning, a slow, steady Philadelphia drizzle that painted the mansion's windows in grey streaks. Teresa arrived at her usual time, her umbrella folding neatly by the front door. She moved silently through the halls, the rhythm of her steps as precise as always. But something felt different. Maybe it was the way the twins watched her now, not with childish indifference but with wide-eyed reverence. Brian reached for her hand every time she walked by. Alan wouldn't stop calling her Miss Hero, or maybe it was Charles. He had made an excuse to stay home again, cancelled meetings, postponed conference calls. Something about needing to be close. But in truth, he didn't want to lose sight of her. Not again. At 11 a.m., Ruthie, the housekeeper, called in sick. Then the cook, already in the kitchen, slipped and sprained her wrist. And just like that, breakfast, clean-up, nap time, everything fell on Teresa. And Charles stayed. They found themselves in the nursery, side by side, folding tiny clothes in awkward silence. Charles sat on the floor beside a laundry basket, misfolding a miniature T-shirt for the third time. Teresa watched him quietly. You've never done that before, have you? He looked up, smirking. Is it that obvious? You folded the sleeves inward. That's how you make a shirt wrinkle on purpose. He raised an eyebrow. You're a folding expert now. I've folded your $800 dress shirts every day for 11 months. I know things. He laughed softly. It was the first time either of them had. A beat passed, then another. You ever think about doing something else? Charles asked, not looking at her. Something more than this? Teresa hesitated. You mean more than folding shirts for rich people who don't remember my name? He winced. I deserved that. She softened, just barely. I went to school for early childhood education, she said, still folding. Wanted to open my own daycare one day, but life happened. What happened? He asked, genuinely. She paused. Does it matter? Only if you want it to. Silence again. But this time it wasn't cold. It was thoughtful. The twins burst into the room with a crash, swords raised, laughter echoing. Brian clambered onto Teresa's lap without hesitation. Alan stood in front of Charles. Daddy, did you know Miss Teresa saved us like a superhero? Charles met his son's eyes, then Teresa's. I know, he said quietly. I'm starting to understand just how lucky we are. Later, in the hallway, Charles stopped her as she carried a basket of laundry downstairs. I want to do something for you, he said, something real. You already pay me. I don't mean that. He hesitated. Then, I want to understand who you are. She stared at him for a moment. Why now? Because before, he swallowed hard, I didn't want to see you, and now I can't stop. Outside, the rain turned to mist, the city below blurred behind fogged windows. Inside, two people, one born into everything, one who had survived with nothing, stood in a hallway full of things left unsaid, and truths waiting to rise. You ever wonder how many people you walk past every day, never realizing they've been through more than you can imagine? How many people you've underestimated, misjudged, maybe even ignored? If this story is getting under your skin, if it's making you feel something, then subscribe, not for the algorithm, for the reminder that everyone has a story, even the people you think you already know. 2 nights later, after the kids were asleep and the house had gone still, Charles found himself sitting in the study with a glass of untouched bourbon. The mansion felt heavier than usual, not because of the silence, but because of the weight of everything unsaid. The more he looked at Teresa, the more he knew he didn't know her at all. She moved like someone who had learned to disappear. She spoke like someone who chose her words the way others chose weapons, carefully, with purpose. And that haunted him. He needed to understand. The answer came the next day, completely by accident. While organizing old boxes in the storage room near the guest wing, Charles stumbled across a file cabinet that hadn't been touched in years. Most of it was junk, receipts, manuals, property blueprints. But one folder, unmarked, slid free from between the drawers. Inside were personnel records, staff files. The HR assistant must have left them there before quitting last year. He wasn't looking for Teresa's file, but he saw her name, Teresa Marie Martin, date of birth, 1989, Baltimore MD, emergency contact, none listed. He flipped through the pages, then stopped cold. A scanned newspaper clipping had been attached. Local childcare worker charged with negligence in daycare fire, 2 toddlers killed. Date, August 14, 2016. Teresa Martin, age 27, former daycare owner, facing charges after fire, breaks out in unlicensed childcare center. Charles's heart dropped. He kept reading. Further down, charges dismissed due to lack of evidence. Witness testimony confirmed Martin attempted to rescue the children before firefighters arrived. The final note, handwritten by the HR assistant who hired her, interviewed in person. She told me the full story. I believe her. Hired her under strict confidentiality. She needed the job. That night, Charles couldn't sleep. He tossed, sat up, pictured her on that rooftop, the way she held his sons like her life meant nothing, and theirs meant everything. He understood now. She wasn't just saving his children. She was saving herself, over and over again. The next morning, he found her in the garden, trimming roses with gloved hands. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. She didn't flinch, didn't look up. "Because you didn't ask." "I found your file." Now she looked at him, calm, steady. "I figured you would eventually," she said softly. "Was it true?" he asked, hating himself for even needing to. Teresa lowered the shears, wiped her hands. "There was a fire. 2 kids died. I was the only adult there. The building wasn't up to code, but I didn't know. I thought I was helping single mothers. I took in kids whose parents couldn't afford licensed centers. They trusted me. I trusted the landlord. Then one day, everything was gone." She paused. "I tried to save them. I pulled 4 kids out. Went back for the last 2. Firemen dragged me out before I got to them." Charles swallowed. Hard. "I lost everything after that," she said. "I couldn't work in childcare again. Couldn't look anyone in the eye. Until this job. It was just cleaning at first. Then the boys, they reminded me of the kids I lost. So I stayed." He didn't say anything at first. What do you say to someone who walks through life carrying that much? But then, he did something he hadn't done in years. He sat beside her, in silence. Not as an employer, not as a billionaire, as a man who finally saw the truth in someone's pain. Have you ever met someone who smiled like nothing was wrong, but carried grief so heavy it would break most people? That's Teresa. And maybe someone you know. The first time they laughed together, it surprised them both. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sun had finally returned to Philadelphia, pouring light through the grand kitchen windows of Belmont Mansion. Teresa was making grilled cheese, not because it was part of her job, but because Alan refused to eat anything else that day. She didn't know Charles had walked in until she heard him clear his throat behind her. She turned, spatula in hand. "Hungry too," he smirked. "Only if it comes with that signature burnt edge I've seen on Brian's plate 3 times this week." She narrowed her eyes. "That's called a crust. It's a technique." He chuckled, and to her surprise, she laughed too. A real one, not polite, not forced, just light. They sat down at the kitchen island, 2 mismatched plates between them. "I haven't eaten a sandwich like this since college," he said between bites. "Feels human." "That's what cheese does," Teresa replied, smiling. "It humbles the rich." They both laughed again, and in that moment, something shifted. For once, there was no power dynamic, no roles, just 2 people sharing a table. One with a past full of silence, one trying, desperately, to rewrite his. The twins ran in halfway through, capes dragging, plastic helmets askew. "Miss Teresa," Brian yelled, "you gotta see my new powers." She knelt as he launched into a dramatic fall. "Oh no, you're hurt. Emergency cheese treatment required." Charles watched from the counter, mesmerized. The way she smiled, the way the boys looked at her, like she was their world, like she'd always been there. And maybe she had. That night, after the boys were asleep, Teresa stayed behind to clean the nursery. Charles passed by the doorway, then stepped in, hesitant. "You don't have to do that tonight," he said. She glanced at him. "And let them wake up to Lego landmines and serial explosions. I'd never forgive myself." He chuckled, leaning against the doorframe. "You ever miss it?" "What? Your daycare, the kids, the dream?" She paused, then nodded. "Every single day." He walked in slowly, lowered himself to sit beside her on the floor. "They love you, you know," he said. "The boys." "I know," she replied quietly. "I love them too." His breath caught. She wasn't saying it lightly. It wasn't casual. It was real. They sat in silence, watching a nightlight blink gently across the ceiling. Charles ran a hand over his face. "I've been alone for a long time, Teresa." Her gaze shifted toward him, soft but firm. "Surrounded doesn't mean connected." "No," he admitted. "It doesn't." He looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, he didn't see a maid. He saw a woman who had lost everything and still got up every morning to give love, even when it wasn't returned. And she saw a man who had everything money could buy, but had never been taught how to love with it. "Why didn't you fire me?" she asked suddenly. "Back on the rooftop before you knew the truth." Charles blinked. "Because even when I thought the worst, I saw something in your eyes." "What?" "Terror, not for yourself, but for them." He reached out, gently brushing her hand with his. "I've never felt more powerless than I did in that moment, and I've never admired anyone more than I did watching you hold on." She didn't pull away. She just let his hand rest there. Have you ever felt that moment when 2 souls, damaged, distant, suddenly recognize something in each other? That's what this is. Not romance, not yet, but something deeper. A beginning. It started with a knock. 3 days after that quiet night in the nursery, just as the first cracks of peace had started to show, someone rang the front bell at Belmont Mansion. Charles was in the study. Teresa was in the laundry room. The twins were building a pillow fort in the den. Ruthie opened the door. 2 strangers stood on the porch, a man with a camera and a woman holding a notebook. "Good morning," the woman smiled. "We're with the Philadelphia Sun. We'd like a word about Teresa Martin." Ruthie froze. "Excuse me?" the reporter continued. "We've received information about her background, about the daycare fire. There's speculation that she's been working here under a false name. Would you be willing to—" Charles appeared behind Ruthie like a shadow. "Leave," he said coldly. "Mr. Arnold, we're simply reporting a story the public has a right to know. Get off my property." Now. The journalist glanced at the cameraman. So, you're confirming she's here? Before Charles could respond, Teresa's voice cut through the hall. I'll answer. She stood in the doorway to the main hallway, hands clean, uniform neat, but eyes full of steel. I've got nothing to hide. Charles turned to her. You don't have to say anything. She ignored him. I tried to save them. That's all I have to say. The woman scribbled furiously. The cameraman captured every second. Teresa's voice stayed calm. If you want to write about me, go ahead. But write the truth. 2 children died in a fire I tried to stop. I live with that every day. And if you think your article will hurt more than that memory, go ahead. Do your worst. The journalist blinked, and for once, said nothing. They left, but the damage was already done. That night, Teresa packed her things. Charles found her in the guest quarters, folding her few belongings into a small suitcase. Stop, he said. You don't have to do this. I can't stay here, she replied, not meeting his eyes. It's only a matter of time before people start looking at me like I'm a threat. And your sons, they don't deserve that. My sons adore you. And the internet doesn't care. She zipped the bag. Her fingers trembled. Teresa, he stepped forward. Please, I know who you are now. That's the problem, she snapped, her voice finally breaking. You didn't before. You only see me now because I saved something that mattered to you. Silence. She turned away. I thought maybe, for a second, I was more than just your maid. You are, he said, voice shaking. You're more than anything I expected, more than I deserve. But she shook her head. You still had to find my story in a file. You didn't ask. You read about my worst day. And that's how I became real to you. She left that night. And for the first time in years, Belmont Mansion felt truly empty. The twins cried when she didn't come the next morning. Brian refused breakfast. Alan tore off his cape and said he didn't want to be a superhero anymore. Charles sat at the head of the table, alone. The chair across from him, where she used to sit to tie the boy's shoes, looked painfully vacant. You ever had something real and not realize how much it meant until it was gone? You ever lose someone not because they didn't love you, but because you didn't love them loud enough? Let that sit with you for a moment. And if you're feeling it, deep, heavy, maybe even ashamed on Charles's behalf, don't just scroll away. Subscribe. Because sometimes love isn't about what we say. It's about what we fail to say, until it's too late. 3 days. That's how long it had been since she left. The halls of Belmont Mansion echoed now, not with footsteps or laughter, but with a kind of absence that you could feel in your bones. The boys were different, quieter. They asked for her every morning and cried themselves to sleep every night. Charles had tried to explain it gently, that Miss Teresa had to go home for a little while, but even he didn't believe the lie, because deep down he knew she hadn't gone home. She had left. In Baltimore, Teresa sat on the porch of her sister's row house, her knees hugged to her chest. A mug of cold tea rested beside her, untouched. She loved those boys, huh? Her sister said from the doorway. Teresa didn't respond. And what about him? Still nothing. Her sister sighed. You know, not everyone's going to treat you like the fire was your fault, but you keep treating yourself like it still is. Teresa finally looked up. You don't understand. No, her sister cut in. You don't. You saved 2 kids. Again. And now you're running away from the one place you were finally being seen, finally being loved. Teresa blinked. Her eyes welled with tears. She hadn't let herself think of Charles. Not really. Not the way his voice softened when he said her name. Not the way he sat beside her on the nursery floor like an equal. Not the way he had looked at her, like she was someone whole. But what scared her more than remembering was how much she missed it. In Philadelphia, Charles stood outside the twins' room, holding a worn superhero cape. Alan had tossed it in the trash that morning. He stared at it, fingers gripping the fabric like it held answers. Then he walked to his office, opened his laptop, and began to type. 2 hours later, a message pinged on Teresa's phone. She ignored it at first. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, got the better of her. She opened it. It was a link to an open letter, posted publicly, signed Charles Arnold. To the woman I judged before I knew her, I used to think I was a good man, a decent father, a strong leader. But when I saw you holding my children on that rooftop, I realized I had failed at the most important thing, seeing the people who keep us alive. You didn't just save Brian and Alan. You saved me. You reminded me what courage looks like, what grace sounds like. I was silent when I should have defended you. I was proud when I should have apologized. This isn't about press. It's not damage control. It's a man asking a woman he respects, and maybe more than that, for forgiveness. The boys still ask about you every night, and I'm not ready to tell them you're never coming back. So this is my choice. I choose to see you. The question is, will you let yourself be seen again? Teresa stared at the screen for a long time. The words blurred. Her heart ached. She hadn't cried when she fell off that rooftop. She hadn't cried when the article came out. She hadn't even cried when she packed her bag in silence. But she cried now. Not because it hurt, but because maybe it didn't have to anymore. Have you ever been loved quietly? The kind of love that doesn't beg, doesn't push, doesn't demand, just waits. Maybe you're like Charles, waiting for the courage to speak. Or maybe, like Teresa, waiting to believe you're worthy of being heard. If this story has ever felt like you... It was a Wednesday morning when the doorbell rang. Charles wasn't expecting anyone. The mansion was quiet. The boys upstairs, still in pajamas, watching cartoons. Ruthie was dusting in the hallway. He opened the door himself and froze. Teresa stood on the front step, her umbrella tucked at her side, her bag slung over her shoulder. She wore no makeup, no apron, just a simple navy coat and a look in her eyes he hadn't seen since the rooftop. Not fear, not pain. Peace. He didn't speak at first, just stepped aside, heart pounding. You came back. I didn't come back to clean, she said gently. I know. And not to pretend none of it happened. I wouldn't ask you to. She stepped inside. Silence hung between them for a moment. Not awkward, not tense, just full, meaningful. The letter, she began, eyes scanning the grand foyer, was the first time you really spoke to me, not as a boss, not as someone trying to fix things, but as a man who finally saw what he'd missed, he finished. She nodded. The sound of footsteps thundered from upstairs, and within seconds, 2 small bodies launched themselves down the staircase. Miss Teresa! Brian reached her first, wrapping his arms around her waist. Alan tackled her leg. You came back. I told Brian you would. I missed you more than peanut butter. Teresa crouched, hugging them tightly, tears stinging the back of her eyes. I missed you more than grilled cheese and superheroes combined, she whispered. Charles watched from the stairs, his throat tight. This was home, and she had been part of it all along. Later that afternoon, after the boys were down for their nap, Teresa stood near the rooftop terrace, the very spot where everything changed. Charles joined her quietly. It feels smaller now, she said, gazing at the edge. You feel stronger, he replied. She glanced at him. I'm still not sure I belong here. I'm not asking you to. She frowned slightly. He continued, voice soft. I'm asking you to stay, because you already do. A long pause. Then finally she spoke. I don't want to be someone you feel sorry for. You're not. I don't want to be someone you just admire from afar. You never were. She looked at him, eyes full, raw, ready. What do you want from me, Charles? He stepped closer. The truth? I want to build something with someone who knows how to fight for what matters, who sees people others overlook, who holds on when most let go, even when it hurts. He reached for her hand, this time gently, openly, without hesitation. I want you, not as my maid, not because you saved my sons, but because you saved me too. She smiled, the kind of smile you give when you've been holding your breath for years, and finally remember how to exhale. "I'm not perfect, Charles," she whispered. "God, I hope not," he smiled back. "Perfect people don't climb rooftops in the rain." They laughed, together. No judgment, no roles, no shame, just two souls and finally seen. Some stories don't end with a kiss or a ring, they end with a choice to stay, to believe, to heal. That's what this was. That's what this is. And if you felt that, if even part of this story echoed something in your own heart, don't let it disappear into the algorithm. Subscribe, not for me, not for the numbers, for you, for the stories like this. The quiet ones, the powerful ones, the ones that remind us that love finds us anyway.